So this is UFG's origin story, starting with Scott McIntyre Jr. And in the late 30s, 1938, he agreed to help this small insurance company called Ace Mutual, and he sort of never left. By 1946, he had incorporated the company under a different name through mergers and acquisitions. United as it is today sort of starts in 1946 when Scott incorporates that as the United Mutual Insurance Company. And then it becomes Fire and Casualty Company, and it continues to change names many times throughout its history. The company first started in a home on First Avenue. So the home office was originally actually a home with all of the departments in the different rooms. So the dining room or the kitchen were used as these different office spaces for all of the different departments of United at that time. So this is the culture of UFG, definitely focusing on the employees here. A little bit later in the history, so this is the 1950s. So there were some different parts of the culture that were important to UFG. Certainly education. UFG's always had a high standard for what their agents and underwriters know about the business, and they provide opportunities for people to advance even if they didn't have formal training prior to joining UFG. So there were agent schools that were offered to the employees outside of the normal work hours. And that was really important to Scott McIntyre Sr. to offer those opportunities. So we do have an agenda from an agent school as well as some photos of the students from that school. And then we also have an employee manual, one of the very first employee manuals for UFG employees, and it talks a lot about the things that you can do to be well liked in the office and what not to do if you want to be well liked in the office. So it has some advice for employees on how to behave. And then we also have a few different activities that employees could engage in. So we've got Christmas parties and holiday parties and celebrations. There was a bowling team available through UFG, so employees were encouraged to participate in events like that to have team building and have time outside of the office. That's always been a part of the culture. So this is a standard desk of an underwriter in about the late 1950s or early 1960s with all of the tools of the trade that would be necessary for that job. The tools may have changed. I'm sure your phones look a little different and you probably don't use an adding machine today. You'd have a computer, but these were the standard tools that agent would need at their desk. And we did include the ashtray as smoking was very common in the office at that time. And then we do include some of the early company communications. So we've got some of the early insurance plans. We also have the coverall, which was like the company newsletter to let all of the employees know what was happening with the other people in the office. As United grew as a company, they also needed to expand their office space. If you remember, they were working out of a small home when United first started, so they were expanding, they needed to grow, so they purchased the Woolworth building and did a restoration of that and also expanded it to convert it into office space instead of a department store. So that was the first major building that UFG purchased as the company expanded, and they purchased several more as we go through the history. So here we move on to the 1970s for UFG. Start in 1971 with data processing equipment, which you can imagine made a huge difference for what it was like to work in UFG and in the office. So it certainly simplified the work of many of the employees, not having to go through files the same way, not having to calculate things the same way. So all of this data processing equipment was installed in '71. And then we have the acquisition of the security building in 1978. So UFG continues to expand, have record profits, increase the number of employees, and therefore they needed more space for these employees to work. So they purchased this building, which was an 8-story building, and it was across the street from the Woolworth building. And so a bridge was constructed between the two buildings. It was a big deal, and there was a bridge party to celebrate this new addition with a guest list so large it had to go over 2 days. So we have the invitations for both days of the bridge party here. With United growing as a company and the employees growing, that was a result of expanding to include a variety of different states that they had not previously been selling in, including Louisiana. UFG did purchase Lafayette Insurance Company in New Orleans, which was one of the oldest insurance companies in the South. And among all of the things that were happening in the 1970s, unfortunately, we also had the passing of Scott McIntyre Sr., and Scotty took over running UFG at that point in 1975. So when Scotty McIntyre Jr. started at UFG, Scott made him go through the same process that any other employee would need to go through. So he started in the mailroom and he worked his way up. He did go to college and get a business degree, and in his master's he focused his thesis on the auto insurance business. So he really did become an expert in the field in order to prepare him to take the reins of the company. Okay, so we move on to some of the later history of UFG, mostly covering the 1980s and the 1990s. The culture of UFG does include hiring women and putting women into leadership roles. So we have a newsletter from 1997 about all the women of impact in the office at UFG. We also have a few different activities that employees did to have a good time together outside of the office. So we've got a slow pitch team here, and they were the championship winners in 1985 at the Amateur Softball Association. United expanded to sell insurance to a variety of different types of businesses at this time. So they offered a family resort, an auto dealer, an antique dealer, and a bed and breakfast program so that they could provide insurance for all of these different categories. So we've got the continued expansion of United Fire and Casualty Company. The first leader is named that is not a member of the McIntyre family, Gary Huber. He began his career in 1973 and gets promoted into his new position in 1989, and then he was replaced by John Reif. John Reif was a celebrated leader of UFG for many years, and he retired in 2007. So part of our exhibit here does include his tribute DVD, as well as the Paramount marquee for when that was shown and the invitation to that event. So with John Reif's retirement in 2007, Randy Ramlow was named as the next CEO of UFG. There were some things to celebrate as well. 20 years on NASDAQ for that anniversary. Ramlow and Reif were both able to go and ring the bell. The insurance industry had been growing for decades, and UFG had been experiencing this huge growth throughout that history. And unfortunately in the 2000s, there was a lot more bad news and some things that were unkind to the industry as a whole. So between Hurricane Katrina in 2005, which devastated a large part of Louisiana, as well as Mississippi and Alabama, and then the flooding in 2008 in Cedar Rapids that was unprecedented. There were a lot of claims around that time, and there was a lot of devastation for agents and underwriters on their own turf. So people were out assessing damage and devastation in their own home communities, and being faced with the disruption of the flooding, with moving home offices, with trying to be responsive to customers when UFG was in crisis mode themselves, just trying to take care of employees and the office spaces. So it was definitely a different feeling within UFG at that time, but thankfully UFG had done all of the work of team building and encouraging their employees to take care of themselves outside of the office. So the employees were able to band together, and despite the poor circumstances, were able to deliver a great product to the customers. Through acquisitions, UFG expanded from coast to coast in where they sold insurance. In 2011, they sold in 43 states and through 1,300 independent agencies. And then with more acquisitions in 2016, that number is now up to 48 states. UFG also continued to expand office space in Cedar Rapids with the purchase of the American building close to their original offices. They were able to expand through remodeling to include this 50,000 square foot, 10-story addition, which complemented and highlighted the original structure of the American building. So UFG then occupied one city block within Cedar Rapids. So they continued to expand both throughout the nation and also their offices within Cedar Rapids. And then UFG also underwent a brand update in 2014 to better reflect the times and to simplify that name. So all of the name changes end with UFG or UFG Insurance becoming the new name and the new tagline being simple solutions for complex times. We've covered the history of UFG starting in 1946 with Scott McIntyre Sr. and moving through the various leaders who have made UFG great, the mergers and acquisitions that have expanded the company, and we're happy to be celebrating 75 years of success for UFG.